This is the Promising Practices for Health Equity podcast, brought to you by the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program, a national leadership program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation.
Hello, and welcome back to Promising Practices for Health Equity, the podcast created by the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program, affectionately known as IRL. I'm your host, Krystal Lee, and my co-host is J. Robin Moon, Associate Director of Research, Evaluation, and Dissemination for IRL. Hey, Robin.
Hi, Krystal.
This season of Promising Practices, as you know, we are exploring the experiences, stories, and lessons learned by our IRL fellows and alumni. And today it is our distinct honor to talk with representatives from Cohort 5 from Team Massachusetts. Welcome, Ndidi Amutah-Onukagha and Christina Gebel. Hello, friends.
Hi, thanks for having us.
We're so glad to have you with us today. Before we ask you to tell us about yourselves and your work, we invite you to engage with us in one of our signature IRL promising practices, checking in with each other. One of our core beliefs is that nurturing personal relationships is key to building communities that collaborate effectively in the work towards health equity. So at the beginning of our meetings, internal meetings of different kinds, we do a quick check-in to help us continuously build connections in our beloved community. So today, here's our check-in question. What is the one thing that makes you feel hopeful these days? I will start. I just saw my nephew who is entering the second year of college, and I'm like 2 generations older than him. I'm older than his mother. I've been thinking a lot about them and their, overall holistic, especially mental well-being, and the work that I do for the next generation and social determinism systems. I might just not be able to see the results. I think that, I have been trained to think about like the outcome at the end of this grant, and at the end of this program, or, whatever I can write in the report, like the immediate results. Speaking of myself, I, tend to obsess, and really looking at him, he gives me, and we have other kids in the family, they give me hope in, what I am not able to see right now for the next generation. So my work might not reap the results tomorrow or next decade, but for him and other kids in the family. So that's the hope that I have for the next generation. I'm going to toss it to Krystal.
Thanks, Robin. One of the things that makes me feel hopeful these days is the connections and the network that I have been creating over the last several years of my life, from college all the way till today. And also my family, having my family close to me is super important. But as it relates to the network, there's so much that's going on in the world, and I have friends in different places, and we are generally of like mind, and we support each other, and we find things that are funny and find just ways to cope together. And I'm grateful that I've been able to cultivate such a supportive network over time. It's really serving me to be able to laugh and talk with my friends, even though we all recognize that things are a little bit strange these days. So that's one thing that's making me hopeful. What about you, Ndidi? I'll toss it to you.
Yeah, I think it's my kids. I know it's my kids. I have 3 little ones, and they have such a curiosity for life. They have such an innocence, and they're just super inquisitive, and they're just so malleable at this age. And I just feel really compelled to provide opportunities for them to always have good experiences, always make meaningful memories, always be kind to people. Like, they're so teachable, and they're so protected from the ills of the world. And so it's just been nice to kind of see life through their eyes, and the things that get them excited, and the things that makes them light up, and the questions that they ask. I think that is what keeps me hopeful and also keeps me accountable.
Yeah, I can add on to that as well. So something that I have found hope in is a gratitude journal that I keep every night, and I have done that since I was 16. And I started writing down something that somebody said each day as something I can look back on and reflect on. And yesterday, I was reached out to by somebody in the wider doula world, and it was just a call to connect and like hopefully offer some help and advice. And she started the conversation by saying, "I've been such a big fan of your work." And I had to like look behind me and be like, is there someone else here? Like the ghost of research past or something, you know? Because that was the first time that I can recall in my life that anybody used that word work with me. And it gave me hope because I realized that someone is out there and they're watching and listening and taking something from it. And I had never known this person before yesterday. And think how many more people for Ndidi, for IRL, think how many more people are looking at the work and being inspired by it. And that work is never going to go away. It's already been done and it'll live on. So.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's jump right in. Ndidi, tell our listeners a little about yourself, and then you can popcorn it to Christina.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I sit in many different identities. I think the one that I'm leaning into right now, as I kind of mentioned in my check-in question, is motherhood, being a mom. I have a young family, and I often joke that I do 14 to 16-hour shifts every day, just to tell you the depth of the labor that it entails to run a household, 3 kids, 3 adults. So that's the identity that I wear pretty proudly and loudly right now, is just a Jackie of all trades, a master scheduler, a diplomat, a negotiator, a comedian, a peacekeeper, a nurse for the boo-boos, a chef. Professionally, I run a research center here at Tufts University and School of Medicine on Black maternal health and reproductive justice. And the framing of my center really is to elevate and promote the birthing experience for Black and Brown people who are disproportionately burdened by racism and inequities in the healthcare system. Out of that work is 2 things that I really kind of have given me a lot of joy. One is a large conference we do every year on Black maternal health, really centering those most impacted and bringing awareness to the topic. And then 2 is my student lab. So I have the largest lab in the country on maternal health scholars and researchers. It's called the Mother Lab. So these are 2 things professionally that bring me a lot of joy. I also, I'm a wife and a sister and a daughter and a researcher. And I consider myself to be a community engaged scholar. I really get a lot of joy and accountability from working with our community partners. And I see myself as someone that is the go-between between the ivory tower and where the solutions are, which is not in the ivory tower. So that's a very long answer to your question, but these are all the titles that I kind of vacillate between on I'm not even going to say daily, I'm going to say like hourly, minute by minute basis. Christina.
Yeah, so if I were to choose the word that I would first describe myself as, I think it would be a writer. I love to write, and not necessarily technical writing, although I do that too. But really, if I could spend my day doing whatever I wanted for 8 hours, it would be more of a like reflective writing voice. I've been in the nonprofit and maternal and child health world for 14 years now, and I think there's been a lot of ups and a lot of downs and a lot of wisdom that's come from that. And I'm in this part of my life right now where I'm starting to reflect a lot about it and what feels authentic and what I feel like I'm ready to kind of set aside in this phase in life. Professionally, I'm a co-founder of a company, Doula Care, which is in Massachusetts, and that's how Ndidi and I became acquainted. And I'm a cat mom. I'm a wife. I love decorating my house, so I've been calling myself a decorator. Yeah, I love engaging creatively, and this work has allowed me to take the creativity to the outlet of solutions in maternal health.
So many superpowers here. Next question is to hear about how you came to health equity work and what health equity looks like to you.
Yeah, so I will honestly say that how I grew up in a very middle class working background looked very homogenous. Every student in my grade school was white. Everybody was Christian. Everybody went to the same church attached to the school. Most of the surrounding areas and where I grew up, again, very homogenous. So for me, it was definitely a bubble that I think, I look back fondly on and I appreciate because I really did have my needs met and had wonderful people around me, but my horizons were very limited. And it wasn't until I went to college, and y'all are gonna laugh, but in college, I thought I was going to become a theology professor.
Oh, I can see that.
Why would we
Okay.
laugh?
Okay. I mean, I laugh now because I was like, I wanted to go straight into the PhD track for theology.
I can see that.
And thankfully, I had a mentor who was like, maybe you should take some time off and think about life. And I did faith-based community service for 2 years at a high school in Chicago. And that's where things really started to broaden. I taught at a school that was an all-girls school, but the tuition was mostly subsidized by philanthropy. And I just fell in love with these girls. Like, a lot of folks don't want to be around teenagers. I think teenagers are some of the most fascinating people on the planet. And some of my students became pregnant during their high school careers. And I found myself not just wanting to help them finish high school, which was obviously important, but wanting to support them in this pregnancy. I used to go to thrift stores in Chicago and I'd pick up all the previous editions of like pregnancy books. And I remember one was called Girlfriend's Guide to Pregnancy. And I had a student who I gave it to who was pregnant, and she came back in the next day and said, I read it cover to cover and I loved it. Now, granted, I was teaching English literature and no one was reading anything else I gave them cover to cover, especially in one day. They were like, I don't need this, not interesting. And it just clicked for me that while the classroom was important, connecting to people on a human and heart level and meeting them where they're at with what's most important to them right now was really where my focus should lie. And so that began a discernment process that led me to becoming a doula and eventually to working toward equity for all maternal health outcomes.
Thank you. I didn't know about the Chicago part of your background. We got to talk more about that. For me, I think, I was doing health equity and experiencing health equity before I had the language. So my parents immigrated to the United States from Nigeria in the late 70s and started having kids in the early 80s in Trenton, New Jersey, which is where I was born and raised. And I think that duality culturally of being Nigerian and foundation and things that were happening in the home and our practices and the focus on communal and education. I think, I was reading encyclopedias from like 8 or 9 years old. It was normal, right? And I think back to that dichotomy, growing up in a really like Christian-based, education-focused, culturally grounded, affirming home. You're a daughter of the land, you're a queen, you're a king for my brothers, like just really, really being super fortified and affirmed. And so we walk out, we're like, I got this. And so that foundation, I spend time saying that because as soon as we walked out, you're met with the opposite of that, right? Trenton is a gritty city. It is the capital of New Jersey. It's my hometown. Nobody can say anything bad about it, but it's a gritty city. It's a bit of a got to have a little bit of street and book smart to make it out. And so I think coming from such a mixed upbringing, this cultural duality, but also being in a school, public education, K through 12, where you're seeing everything that you would think happens in an urban school district in the 90s. I mean, all those movies, Dangerous Minds, that was my school. All those movies, that was our experience every day, and it was normalized. Having friends that had kids in high school, normalized. Going to funerals of people that, died from gang violence or police violence, or people that were incarcerated at 16, 17, 18 years old doing life sentences, that was normalized. I didn't understand the language at the time, but I did know, I was smart enough to know and I was aware enough to understand that kids that were in neighboring high schools, so Trenton is an urban community in a very wealthy county, Mercer County, New Jersey. And I was a captain of the debate team. So we'd go to other schools and I'd be like, wow, look at their classrooms. They have doors and computers. And I remember we walked into one high school, they had carpet. I was like, oh my God, I'm in the White House. So it was interesting because I didn't have the language, but I knew implicitly, like, these students are going to have better educational advantages than people coming from my high school. And it was reflected in the data. Trent has the lowest, or is the lowest, or top 5 lowest performing high schools in the state still till today. Our graduation rate is abysmal. And, I think it's the perfect hotbed of opportunity and inequity. We used to have an industrial economic movement that has dried up. And so now people are trying to do what they can to survive. All of that is health equity. That was all my foundation. That was all my upbringing, social determinants of health. I saw people's access or lack thereof. I literally watched what it means to be able to have access to transportation, eat healthy fruits and vegetables, have quality education. All these things, I didn't have the language, but I felt it in my spirit. These people that have these things are going to have better outcomes, are going to live longer lives than people that grow up on my block and in my community. And then when I went to college, I majored in public health, and that's when I started to get the language, social determinants of health and life expectancy and quality of life. And I said, this is what I grew up in. I didn't know it, but I did know that my counterparts in high school weren't going to funerals at 15, 16. They're writing on the lunch napkin, does Johnny like me? And let's go get pizza after cheerleading camp. We weren't doing that in Trenton. Okay. So it was just, for me, my lived experience is so central to who I am as a researcher, because I am my community. I feel what my community partners, I lived it. And that's what gives me authenticity when I come into the community. And that's what also gives me the opportunity to prioritize community in the research process when it comes to allocation of resources, or who gets the lion's share, how money is given out. I don't approach it from an academic model, because that model will leave a pittance for the community. Once you put in an overhead and an indirect cost, there's nothing left. That's actually what you need to do the work. So I feel really grateful to have the framing of an academic, but the heart of a community. And I carry Trent with me everywhere I go. I think it's why I'm so successful, because I was able to have that upbringing. But that is my introduction to health equity. It was really watching communities around me and how people have to work 2, 3 jobs, and how people, are late for appointments. And what does that mean when you have to take the bus? You have to take 2 buses. You have to take 3 buses, and you're late. Now you can't get that appointment or that job because you have to drop the kids off, and now you're late. That's social terms of health. These income inequities exacerbate over time. And now the gap widens and widens, and the stress deepens and deepens, and stress kills people at 35 and 45 and 55. But you see your counterparts that have more resources and autonomy over their time, they're living till 70, 80 with their retirement plans. But we're not seeing that in urban communities. So that's my introduction to health equity. That's how I got into the work.
Wow. Thank you all for sharing those deeply personal experiences that led you to the work of working towards health equity. So the title of your IRL project was Promoting Maternal Health Equity Through Collaborative Community Partnerships, : teaming doulas, providers, and families to create birth equity. If you wouldn't mind, tell us and tell our listeners about your project and about the promising practices that have emerged from your work.
Christine, you want to kick us off?
Okay. So I think Ndidi would start by saying that we wrote the grant during the pandemic. We had ordered Panera into a conference room and we're really just vibing and brainstorming, not having any idea what was coming in the year 2020.
Yep.
But Ndidi, myself, and our third team member, who is an OBGYN, really brought three sides of the coin, both as a community organization person, a scholar, and a clinical provider. And I think something that inspired me in creating the project was, as a doula, I'm tasked with giving people the information they need to know, but I've always really struggled with doing that in a way that doesn't increase anxiety. And something that had been concerning to me, and I think all of us, was finally the attention had been paid to the disparate experiences of maternity in this country. But it's also extremely scary, especially for Black women or Black birthing people. But I would say for everybody, I've had 2 pregnancy losses to date, and I still get very anxious when I enter into the system myself because I've seen the breakdown so many times. And so as a doula working directly with families, a lot of time we talk about empowerment and this and that and know the information, but what if the information you're giving people is causing stress and anxiety to them despite needing to know it? So we were really interested from a multifaceted angle, doulas, providers, partners, birthing people, looking at where we had landed with the issue of maternal mortality and all the attention that had been paid to it, and wanting to really tap into how people were feeling about it, how it was informing their maternity care choices, because what do you do with all that information? How does that change where you go and access care? And more importantly, now that the wider society, I guess you could say, is aware, what really is the vision of what will heal and produce better outcomes in the future. So that's how I would describe it. I'm sure, Ndidi, you would add some things in there as well.
Yeah, I think that was a great summary, and I can't believe that you remembered it was Panera. It was like 5 years.
Memorable meal.
I mean, I always remember free food where it came from. So,
well, I think the crux of what Christina mentioned is that this grant was written from a place of like love, right? And I think that's the one thing that we need in a conversation around maternal health. Every time I do a talk on the inequities in the data, and 84% of maternal deaths are preventable, and Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die, people are always it's so jarring to hear that if you don't sit in this data every day. And I always get a question from the audience, what can we do? And I always say, as a clinician, as a service provider, as someone in the perinatal workforce, all you need to do is to just be human, right? Like if we saw each other as human beings, this person giving birth could be your mother, aunt, or sister, sorority member, anybody that you feel a connection to. If we just started off there, we would not have the race that we have. The problem comes when we see people as different than who we are, as othered, as marginalized, as those people over there with those issues. That's where the problem comes into. And so this teaming framework that we approached our work, to me, is like the gold star of the North Compass of what we should be doing to ameliorate these inequities. Christina as a doula, me as a researcher, our colleague Audra as an OBGYN. These 3 members, like that is the trifecta. That's where the solution is, right? And we have lived experience, we have professional expertise, like this is what is needed. So that's the idea that we used to come up with the project. And I'm really proud of what we were able to accomplish. I think it's an incredible contribution to the work. I think it definitely shows that we are not as siloed as we currently are. We don't need to be that siloed. And I think when we respect each other's professional and personal expertise, you can work together communally. That's the thing that I think worked the best. And so the project is one of those kind of like bright stars when you think about your portfolio of research and the random clinical trials and the multi-site interventions and the blah, blah, and the blah, blah. This is like that like warm cookie project. Like it's just had such a sweet spot in my heart because of the love that was behind the writing of the project. And that's why the grant was so good. I mean, we did one take. It was literally written in one day and it was funded because we put our heart into that. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I have a follow-up question. If one of you would speak to like, what is the vision? What are you all working to achieve? What does the future look like to you based on your work?
I hoped you would ask this question because, one of the things about the podcast is what promising practices have you brought to the work? And I don't think we can answer that question without talking about one of the ones that we brought. So we enlisted a consultant, Namisha Patel, from the New Guard to teach us about design thinking. And design thinking essentially encourages you to take something that is, look at it in a new way and make something it ought to be. Like that is the vision. And I think having been in the academic world, myself included with our team members, for a very long time, we didn't want to just go about collecting data in a way that we always had, or like looking to the literature about how to structure the questions. Like we wanted to radically blow open the data collection process. And that's why design thinking starts with the assumption that what you should be creating or envisioning in this aspect should be something that the user wants for themselves and could see themselves using. It would make their life a whole lot easier, and in this case, safer. So, we went through this process, we learned a lot about it, and there's actually some really great literature out there on CBPR and integrating design thinking. But one of the frameworks that the consultant brought to us was actually out of NYU, Scott Galloway, and it is a framework that kind of blew my mind as someone who's done a lot of focus groups in the past. He talks about focus group experience and how, you think of it as inclusive, and certainly we had included a lot of stakeholders, but afterwards, those people should feel dignified. You think of it as a trusting space, but afterwards they should feel a sense of healing. You think of it as an authentic space, but afterward they should actually feel connected. And then the last one was encouraging and safe. People should feel hopeful and satisfied. So that right there, I would say, created the soil to talk about vision, because we weren't just there to talk about the data, we're already there on what the problem is. We really wanted to create spaces and instruments, if you will, to draw out the depths of how people would like the system to be. So I'll pause there.
I have nothing to add to that, Christina. That's incredible. I mean, I think for me, the only thing I would say is like what keeps coming up for me is our promising practice is community, rooted in community. That is something that's a little bit peripheral to academic conditioning. As academics, we are focused on really this top-down approach. And our project was really grassroots, right? We worked with providers, we worked with doulas, midwives, we work with families, birthing people. This really communal approach to everyone's input is part of the teaming process. It's not just providers who are kind of calling the shots, it's people that are actually giving birth, and their family members and their support systems and their doulas. And right, what does this kind of triangulation look like? So that's a promising practice that I think we need to reframe in the academy is where do the solutions lie? What is the definition of expert? How do we expand that definition to be community centered and to also incorporate the people that allow us to function in our expertise, which is our families? If anybody was to talk to my husband, he could give you a whole rendition of our birthing process, right? And I think we are super siloed and we miss a lot of the richness in the data and frankly the solutions when we operate from that approach.
So wonderful. We keep on hearing very similar promising practices from other guests here in the podcast. So it's really confirming. So user-centered, user-led, all about the user, starting from with inside out. And I also heard you talk about like how personal it has been from how you encountered health equity from a young age and how that has shaped your vision in life. So I think that is a promising practice also something we've been hearing. And it's certainly not something that we have seen codified in public health textbooks. So those two, I mean, yeah, enough said. That's really beautiful. And we will share the source from NYU Scott Galloway in our podcast notes also for the audience. Now about even more personal. So one of our core beliefs at this podcast is summed up in the words of Octavia Butler when she says, "All that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you." So the interwoven nature of this work, which goes with all the personal investment that you've been talking about. Well, each of you briefly share with us how IRL community that you've been part of since 2020, which I remember the virtual meeting, all virtual, and it was a really trying time. How has IRL have changed you, and how do you think that you've changed the program and the IRL community?
I'd love to hear Ndidi's answer.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on this journey. I think being the cohort in 2020 was such a seminal event, and I do think there are things that worked really, really well, like our community meeting every Friday in community, those workshops, the speakers, the didactic parts. I think that was really helpful to kind of ground us. It has changed me because it has helped to reframe my kind of individualistic perspective on doing research. Like there's such a network, such a richness around the country of brilliant scholars, community members, just such a depth to this work. And we all approach it with that passion and commitment and intentionality. That is incredible. Another thing that I really appreciated is just how level the power dynamics were between the academic partner and the community partner. That was very intentional. It was woven throughout every part of the project and the funding. And I love that model of doing research. And so that has changed me and made me even more grateful and humble when I'm in the space of working among my community research partners. So those things. And then of course, IRL and RWJF do nothing small. So just to be in community together in these incredible spaces, the agendas were so, so thoughtful, and the follow-up, even making sure we still have an alumni network to tap into. It's just a family. It's a research family, a network of practitioners that you can always lean on that is super receptive. And I'm so grateful to be a part of it because it has reframed how I think about research and who I reach out to and how I work with community. So, yeah.
Wow, that's a huge compliment. Thank you. Christina, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that one common thread that I'm feeling as I reflect back on the first question and then how we want the vision to be, and then this question with IRL is a thread of authenticity. So when I was a high school teacher, and I'm thankful that I learned this lesson because Teenagers are a tough crowd. They really want to know what you're about and if you're there for them and who you are, and that you're not trying to put on any pretenses or hats, or are you really there for them? Are you there for you? So I remember the vulnerability of going into the spaces and thinking that, wondering if I would establish trust if on, the face of it, we were so different in how we had arrived there. But what they taught me was that authenticity can really ground everybody in the room and be the place where trust can flourish. And throughout my life after that experience, I will say I lacked spaces where that full vulnerability and trust dynamic could flourish. And one of the spaces I eventually felt that is, I'll just say, working with my fellow team members, Ndidi and Audra. We are friends. We are also colleagues. And it was so nice to be in an authentic, trusting, vulnerable space with them throughout the project that the program only encouraged and furthered by the culture, the ethos, and the vibe, if you will, that was always in the room. So I would say these are rare spaces, but they're powerful spaces because a lot of good work and good community and good trust and relationships can come out of that. So that's what I appreciated about IRL.
Thank you. Beautifully said.
Thank you all so much. One of the things that has been obvious to me in this conversation and in others is the personal nature of the work, especially for many of the folks that we've talked to. The work that they do is connected with their history and their experience. And connecting that to the fact that the work towards health equity and against systems of oppression can be so challenging and can take its toll. So the final question we want to ask is, if you could please share with our listeners, how do you engage in self-care as you do this difficult work?
Peloton.
I didn't know that.
I love my Peloton. I got it after the birth of our second.
It's not a sponsor message.
I know. Peloton legit has changed my life. If you see me on a Saturday morning, I'm rocking the gear full. Like, I love Peloton. I like them because I love the accessibility class. You only got 5 minutes. I got a 5-minute class. You got 60 minutes, which I have to do. I got a 60 minutes.
User-centered.
Yes, user-centered.
Yes.
And so that's my thing. When I feel the stress on me, we all hold stress in our bodies in different ways. I'm like, babe, hold the kids. I need 15 minutes. I go in there and I run it out. And of course, that releases the endorphins. You come out, you feel great. So that's my thing. And I also have started doing these like mommy breaks. And so like, if I'm going to a conference or I'm going to speak somewhere, I come in a little bit early or I stay a little bit late. And it could be like half a day, but that's just I don't have any free time. That's my free time, right? Like those 6 hours before I have to leave is like heaven. So I've started to be more intentional about timing, because you're never going to wake up with 3 kids and say, oh, what am I going to do today, right? Like your day is already done for you. So that's like my self-care, is to remember myself in the work.
That's incredible. I would say all of that shines through, and Ndidi impresses me every day, and it impresses me that you have the physical energy to do everything you just, it's incredible. I don't think we can overstate enough how much doing this as a mother is especially a challenge and a triumph. For me, I think it's been my creative side. So I love to host people. I love to, like I said, do thoughtful touches around our home that make people feel and think like I really thought about them, or we're really trying to communicate something about who we are as a family. My husband comes from a different culture, and it's been a pleasure and an honor to try to navigate 2 different cultures, 2 different religions, 2 different cuisines. Like, beautiful things can come from that intersection. And I wanted our home to be a space that clearly communicates that we celebrate and cherish that. We also live in like a wooded area. And it's funny because now when my husband and I go to the city, we're like so overwhelmed. We're like, oh my gosh, look at all this noise, like cars, so many cars, you know? And I think we both each have had moments of realizing how much the quiet has penetrated into our soul and like helped us. You know, he's really big into meditation. I'm really big into prayer and journaling, like I said. So the quiet has just been like what we needed at this point in our life and a huge well to draw from for self-care.
That's a lot of wisdom from
Thank
both of
you.
you. Thank you so much. Team Massachusetts, Ndidi and Christina, Cohort 5, 2020 through 2022. Thank
Yes.
you so much for sharing your stories with us today. We deeply appreciate your insights.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. We are so grateful for you to be here with us and to share your wisdom and your experience with us and with our listeners. It is such a gift to us. Thank you. And thank you also to our listeners. We would love to hear from you. What promising practices are you using in your work to achieve health equity? Find us on the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders LinkedIn page, where you can share your thoughts and leave questions for us or for Team Massachusetts. And don't forget to subscribe to Promising Practices for Health Equity so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for joining us on this journey where every step we take together brings us closer to a healthier, more just world. Until next time, take care.
Promising Practices for Health Equity is produced by the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program, a national leadership program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. A special thanks to our guests, our production team at Studio Americana, and to you, our listeners, for being a part of this important conversation.